This video will begin our discussion of microevolution in the field of population genetics. Recall that to test for changes in populations, we use the Hardy-Weinberg equation, which provides us with a mathematical relationship between the allele and genotype frequencies in a population under the conditions listed here. Also recall that almost no populations ever meet these criteria, and thus Hardy-Weinberg only serves as a null model to measure changes in allele and genotype frequencies within populations. So, what are the things that lead to allelic variation in the gene pool of a population? Well, they're basically the conditions of the Hardy-Weinberg, including changes in birth and death rates, immigration in or emigration out of the population, mutations, and natural selection, and lastly, genetic drift. The factors that affect allelic variation in a population fall under the umbrella of microevolution. This term describes changes in a population's gene pool from one generation to the next. Note that microevolution only involves populations. Thus, this term refers to changes within a single species and not broad-scale speciation, which would fall under the term macroevolution. Now, genetic mutations underpin all the mechanisms that alter genetic variation in populations and among species too, but let's focus on populations for now. These mutations provide the raw material for which things like natural selection act on. Without these mutations and variation among individuals within populations, there would be no evolution by natural selection. So, what is natural selection? By now, you are certainly familiar with this term, so I'll just briefly restate it here. Darwin and Wallace proposed that heritable, adaptive traits provide reproductive advantages that, over several generations, allow for some allelic variants to survive better than others. Natural selection is a passive mechanism and can only work on the existing phenotypic variation within a population. Basic schematic for this process is illustrated here. Within a population, there is natural phenotypic variation. Some of these phenotypes are better suited for their environments, such as avoiding predators, and they reproduce more often than other less suited population members. Over time, the well-suited members of the population reproduce more and more compared to the other population members and thus pass on more of their genes and traits to the next generation. To understand natural selection in populations, we have to get a few key points under our belt. Firstly, there really is no fittest organism, just a fit enough one that's a bit better than their fellow population members. There isn't really a perfect trait that organisms can engineer because the selection pressures, for one thing, they change over time. Additionally, the variation in a trait must already exist in a population, and so fully optimized traits would often violate some physiological or developmental constraint and wouldn't actually be possible. As I said previously, being fit in a population is a relative measure. An organism's fitness is their relative reproductive success. Additionally, fitness is all about reproduction and not always about being the biggest, strongest, or fastest organism in the population. Think about natural selection in a modern molecular context, we see these four tenets. One, allelic variation in a population caused by mutation leads to proteins with differing functions being produced. Two, some of these proteins enhance an individual's survival and reproduction relative to other members of the population. Three, individuals with these beneficial alleles and proteins are more likely to survive and reproduce. And lastly, over several generations, this leads to shifts in the frequency of alleles in the population, and the beneficial alleles become dominant in the population due to this increased reproductive success.